a single Greek word that no one has translated the same way. At the center of every Christian debate about hell lies one word, just one. It appears 71 times in the New Testament. Almost every Bible translation renders it as eternal or forever. And the three major traditions of Christianity have reached radically different conclusions about what it means. The word is aionios, and what each tradition did with it. Catholics, working from Latin, Protestants inheriting that Latin reading, Orthodox operating directly from the original Greek, explains more than anything else why the Catholic hell, the Protestant hell, and the Orthodox hell don't look anything like each other. But before getting to the word, it's necessary to understand what each tradition built around it, because the differences aren't merely a matter of degree, they're structural, incompatible. Three answers to the same questions that converge at no point. If you want to understand what people actually believe, not the surface version, not the comfortable summary, but the real doctrine underneath, subscribe to this channel. That's exactly what we do here. The root of the problem: three Greek words that became one. The New Testament was written almost entirely in Greek, and it uses at least three distinct words to describe realities that every tradition ended up translating with a single word. Hell, Gehenna, used 12 times. Hades, used 10 times. Tartarus, used once. None of these words translates directly as hell without the translator making a theological decision in the very act of translating. Each tradition made that decision. None made the same one. And that's where everything grows from. The Catholic hell, built over centuries, layer by layer. Of all three traditions, Catholic theology of hell is the most elaborate, not because it emerged fully formed, but because it was built over centuries, with specific names associated with specific editions. The foundation comes from Augustine of Hippo in the 4th and 5th centuries. For him, the punishment of the damned is eternal and conscious, and involves real suffering in two dimensions: the poena damni, the pain of permanent separation from God, and the poena sensus, the pain of concrete sensory torment. Fire, for Augustine, was not metaphor. It was a real element acting upon souls in a way that defies natural physics, burning without consuming, inflicting endless pain. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century systematized this in a way that could withstand philosophical scrutiny. The central question he faced: how does an infinitely just God impose infinite punishment for a finite life of sin? Aquinas' answer was precise. The gravity of an offense is measured not only by the act, but by the dignity of the one offended. An offense against an infinite God carries infinite weight. Eternal punishment is, by this logic, proportional. The Councils of Florence, 1439, and Trent, 1545, crystallized all of this into formal dogma. The souls of the damned descend immediately to hell and are tormented with unequal punishments. After Trent, this was no longer theological opinion. It was defined doctrine. Purgatory changes the entire ecosystem. The Catholic Church possesses an element that neither of the other two traditions has, and which completely alters the logic surrounding hell: purgatory. The fundamental distinction of purgatory is this: it is not a destination for the damned, but a stage for those who are already saved. Those who pass through purgatory go to heaven. The only question is the purification required before the full vision of God. And this is where purgatory becomes theologically explosive. It opens a channel of communication between the living and the dead. Praying for someone who has died is not an empty gesture. It is an effective action. Masses offered in the name of the deceased, indulgences, acts of charity, all of this carries real weight for the condition of the soul awaiting purification. When the 16th century reformers rejected purgatory, they weren't merely discarding an isolated doctrine. They were dismantling an entire system that had structured piety, funerals, monasteries, the economy of mercy, and the relationship between living and dead generations for over 1,000 years. It's also worth mentioning the limbo of the unbaptized. For centuries, Catholic theology held that unbaptized infants could not enter heaven, but were not condemned to hell either. They existed in a limbo, natural happiness without the beatific vision. In 2007, the Vatican concluded that limbo was a possible theological opinion, not defined doctrine, and expressed hope that unbaptized infants might be saved by God's mercy. The branch didn't fall, but it was declared optional. The Protestant hell, one trunk, 5 branches, no authority to resolve anything. The Protestant Reformation did not set out to redesign hell. It set out to reform the Church. But when Luther attacked indulgences in 1517, he was cutting the root of the practical significance of purgatory. If indulgences were corrupt, the entire apparatus of praying and paying for the dead collapsed along with them. Calvin was more systematic. He confirmed eternal conscious torment with the same firmness as Augustine, but eliminated any doctrinal escape valve. There is no intermediate state, no effective prayer for the dead, no Mass that alters what has already been sealed. Death ends the process. What was decided was decided. This logic remains dominant in much of evangelicalism, Baptist, Reformed, and Charismatic traditions to this day. Hell is real, conscious, permanent. The fire of the Gospels is taken seriously as literal flame by some, as the most approximate description of something even more terrible by others. The problem is that Protestantism, unlike Catholicism, has no central authority to fix doctrine for everyone. There is no magisterium. And without a magisterium, theological diversity is not contained. It proliferates. The 5 positions that coexist without resolution. The most significant minority position is annihilationism, also called conditional immortality. The argument: the Bible does not teach that human souls are naturally immortal. Immortality is a gift from God given to the redeemed. The unredeemed do not burn forever. They cease to exist. The punishment of the damned is not eternal suffering, but eternal death, the permanent extinction of consciousness. Fire consumes. It does not preserve in torment. Edward Fudge defended this position with academic depth in his 1982 book, The Fire That Consumes. John Stott, one of the most respected evangelical theologians of the 20th century, declared before his death that he felt drawn to annihilationism and found eternal conscious torment deeply troubling. The Seventh-day Adventist Church holds it as official doctrine. In 2011, Rob Bell published Love Wins, Moving Toward Universalism. The response from mainstream evangelicalism was not debate. It was expulsion. Bell was effectively removed from his position within months. The reaction revealed where Protestant theological tolerance actually ends. Annihilationism is controversial but survivable. Universalism is not. The result is a spectrum. Eternal conscious torment at one end, annihilationism in the middle, a fringe of universalism that the mainstream refuses to accept. 5 significant positions, no authority to arbitrate among them, all operating under the same label. The Orthodox hell, a completely different route. Here, the ground shifts radically. Eastern Orthodox theology approaches hell from a framework that has no equivalent in Western Christian thought. To understand why, one must first understand that Orthodoxy rejected the juridical framework that both Catholicism and Protestantism inherited from the Latin West. In the Western framework, developed most fully by Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century, salvation is understood primarily as a legal problem. Humanity contracted an infinite debt through sin. That debt demands satisfaction. The death of Christ provides that satisfaction. Hell is the sentence for those whose debt remains unpaid. Orthodox theology does not start from that point. For Orthodox theologians, the problem of sin is not a legal debt. It is a disease, a corruption of human nature that separates humanity from communion with God. Salvation is not the payment of a debt. It is the healing of a condition, and that changes everything that follows. Isaac of Nineveh, the fire that comes from love. The Orthodox understanding of hell draws most substantially from Isaac of Nineveh, a 7th century Syrian bishop whose writings profoundly shaped the spirituality of the Christian East. For Isaac, what torments the damned is not a fire imposed from outside by a punishing God. It is love, the very love of God, identical for all, but received in opposite ways depending on what the soul has become over the course of its life. The soul that opened itself to love encounters the divine presence as complete joy. The soul that spent its life closing itself against love encounters that same presence as unbearable burning, not because God rejects it, but because it has become incapable of receiving what is being permanently offered. The fire of hell and the light of paradise are not two distinct sources of energy. They are the same God, encountered by souls in radically opposite states. Kallistos Ware, one of the most widely read Orthodox theologians in the English-speaking world, summarized it this way: God does not send anyone to hell. Hell is what a soul has built within itself, and what that soul experiences when it finally confronts what it spent its life avoiding. This is not soft universalism. Orthodox theology holds that hell is real, the suffering is real, and the condition of the damned is genuinely terrible. But the mechanism is entirely different from anything in the Western traditions. There is no tribunal, no sentence being carried out. There is only what you have become encountering what God is. Gregory of Nyssa and the possibility the West doesn't touch. Here is what surprises most people who encounter Orthodox theology for the first time. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocian Fathers, not a marginal figure, wrote in favor of apokatastasis, the eventual restoration of all things, including the damned. He believed that God's purifying fire would eventually accomplish its work in every soul, and that the duration of hell, however vast, would have an end. This position was associated with Origen and condemned at the Fifth Ecumenical Council in 553. But the condemnation targeted Origen's specific cosmological system, not every form of universalism. Gregory of Nyssa, who held a version of this view, was never condemned and is venerated as a saint. The result is a space in Orthodox theology that does not exist in Catholicism or mainstream Protestantism. Universalism is not heresy, but a contested possibility, held by revered figures within the tradition. The three questions where the disagreement cuts deepest: is hell eternal? Catholics: yes, formally defined dogma at Florence and Trent, reaffirmed in the 1992 Catechism, which softened the language about who goes to hell, but did not alter the eternity of the sentence. Protestants: most say yes, eternal conscious torment. A significant minority says no, the damned are annihilated. A fringe says no one is definitively condemned. Three answers, no mechanism to resolve them. Orthodox: formally, yes. The condition of the damned persists. But the tradition keeps open, through Gregory of Nyssa, the possibility that God's purifying work will eventually reach every soul. Is the fire literal? Catholics: They have wavered. Augustine treated it as real fire acting upon souls in ways that transcend natural physics. The modern catechism uses language of state and separation from God without explicitly rejecting earlier formulations. Deliberately ambiguous as to physical nature, clear as to the reality of suffering. Protestants, divided. Many treat fire as the most accurate metaphor available for unimaginable suffering. Some take it literally. Annihilationists reinterpret it as consuming, not preserving. Orthodox, the fire is real, but not physical. It is the divine presence itself, the uncreated light of God, experienced as torment by a soul incapable of receiving it. This is not vagueness disguised as metaphor. It is a precise theological claim about what causes the suffering. Does God send people to hell, or do they choose to go? Catholics, both. God judges, and the damned are sent. But the Catechism affirms that God predestines no one to hell. Damnation is self-exclusion through persistent refusal to love. Protestants, divided along the oldest fault line in their tradition. Calvinist and Reformed traditions emphasize divine election, God's sovereign choice over who is saved, and by implication, who is not. Arminian traditions emphasize human freedom, hell as the destination of those who freely reject salvation. This disagreement has existed since the 16th century and remains unresolved. Orthodox, the most unambiguous answer of the three. God sends no one. Hell is not a sentence. It is what a soul has become, made manifest in the presence of God. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer in the comments because I think the responses will be genuinely interesting. Whatever tradition you grew up in, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, or another, what version of hell were you taught existed? A place of literal fire? A state of separation? Something that lasts forever? Something that perhaps doesn't? A punishment imposed by God or a condition the soul chooses? Because most people I know were taught one thing, assumed it was universal Christian teaching, and never discovered that the person in the church across the street believed something structurally different. Leave that in the comments. Not whether you believe in hell, Diodor, but whether the version you learned matches what this video described. How hell moved history. The doctrine of hell never stayed in theology books. It moved through history as a concrete force that shaped institutions and the texture of everyday life. The sale of indulgences, which triggered the Protestant Reformation, was not primarily a financial scandal. It was the logical commercial expression of a fully developed Catholic doctrine about purgatory and hell. If purgatory was real, if masses for the dead could shorten its duration, and if the Pope held the keys to the treasury of merit accumulated by Christ and the saints, then those merits could be dispensed. The phrase attributed to the preacher Johann Tetzel, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs," was not theological innovation. It was the popularized form of a doctrine with serious medieval roots. Luther's attack on indulgences was an attack on the entire infrastructure that the Catholic hell had built. The Protestant removal of purgatory restructured the relationship between the living and the dead. In Catholic practice, the dead remain present to the living, through the Mass, through the calendar of saints, through prayers. In Protestant practice, the dead are gone. The gate is closed. You cannot pray for them, offer anything in their name, intercede. That changes grief. It changes funerals. It changes the architecture of suffering in the face of loss. The Orthodox tradition kept the practice of praying for the dead. Memorial services, the Panikhida in the Slavic tradition, are regular elements of Orthodox practice. The dead are remembered on specific Saturdays throughout the year. The underlying assumption is not that they are in purgatory enduring measurable suffering, but that the community of the Church extends beyond the boundary of death, and that praying for the departed is a natural expression of that continuity. These are not abstract differences in theology manuals. They are differences in what happens at a wake, in what a priest or pastor says to a grieving family, in what a mother believes she can or cannot do for a child who died without faith. Protestant revivalism of the 18th and 19th centuries used hell as a conversion mechanism. Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, later Dwight Moody and Billy Sunday, vivid sermons about hell that produced mass conversions, collective weeping, physical reactions in congregations. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Edwards' 1741 sermon, is probably the most famous piece of rhetoric about hell in all of American religious history, and it also produced a reaction. Later, Protestant theologians questioned whether conversion based on fear was spiritually valid. 20th century annihilationism grew in part from that discomfort. The Orthodox tradition operates in a different register. Orthodox preaching tends to emphasize mercy and repentance far more than the mechanics of damnation. The icon of the Last Judgment exists in Orthodox churches. It is standard decoration. But the pastoral tone has generally been less oriented toward fear as a motivator and more toward love as an attraction. Back to the word that started everything, aionios. It appears 71 times in the New Testament. Almost every Bible translates it as eternal or forever. Matthew 25:46. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life, is the most cited verse in defense of eternal hell. The word translated as eternal is aionios. The problem is that aionios does not simply mean eternal in the sense of infinite duration. Its root is aion, age, era. Aionios naturally means of the age or belonging to the age to come. It is a qualitative description of a type of existence, not a quantitative measurement of endless time. Classical Greek usage supports this. Jewish literature contemporary to the New Testament uses aionios to describe things that are finite but era-defining. The Septuagint itself, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, uses aionios to describe things that clearly have an end. The Aaronic priesthood, the observance of Passover, the laws of the covenant. The Orthodox theological tradition, working in Greek from the beginning, always had access to this philological complexity, and never fully committed to reading aionios as infinite duration. The Western traditions, Catholic and Protestant, working primarily from Jerome's Latin Vulgate, which translated aionios as eternus, inherited a reading that closed off that complexity. So when Matthew 25:46 says eternal punishment, what it may be saying is the punishment of the age to come. What that age is, how long it lasts, what its punishment consists of, none of that is resolved by the word itself. Three traditions read the same word and arrived at entirely different places. One erected a doctrinal architecture of eternal torment, validated by councils and catechisms. Another fragmented into competing positions with no recognized arbiter. The third never closed the question and maintained as a legitimate possibility that the definitive fire of God may be, in the end, purifying for every soul. 71 occurrences of the same word. In none of them does it deliver, with the clarity each tradition demanded, what it actually means.